to the Herd in the Corridor podcast, a podcast about understanding business within the U.S.-India corridor and beyond. I'm Angela Chitkara, and I'm delighted to introduce you to my guest co-host, your friend and mine, Chair and Senior Fellows and Senior Advisor in Global Markets at the Milken Institute, Curtis Chin, based in Bangkok. Hello, Curtis.
Hello, great to be with you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Joining us today also on the podcast is Sriniwasan, Managing Editor of Kotak Alternate, with assets under management of over US $8.8 billion across real estate, private credit, distressed assets, and private equity. Srini is based in Mumbai. Welcome, Srini.
Thank you, Angela, for inviting me to this, and good to meet you, Curtis.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's start off, Srini. You have 3 decades of experience in India, investing, banking, and investment management, including building a joint venture with Goldman Sachs. Describe for us this moment in time for India as it celebrates its 77th year of independence and its trajectory with the Make in India campaign, India's presence in the region and on the global stage. Curtis is also excited to talk to you about India's presence at the Paris Olympics.
Yeah, it's a great time to be an investor, an entrepreneur, and a person who is alive to what's going on in terms of the trajectory in which the country is headed. For me, as you rightly mentioned, I've been doing this, been in the markets for over 30 years. And when I look back and look at the evolution of where we started and where we are today, I am actually pretty amazed with the kind of changes that we've seen. And from a professional point of view, the kind of changes that I have seen in the overall market infrastructure in the country. And I dare say that the way the regulations and the markets have evolved in India, they are probably up there with regard to technology, with regard to transparency, and with regard to the kind of trading volumes that we have been seeing and the way the markets are regulated. So that's one aspect of it. On the social aspect of it, I have literally seen people getting better in terms of their lives and livelihoods, and the changes in the economy, and with the most difficult time of COVID behind us, and the way the government managed to ensure that all the naysayers who thought that India will be a complete disaster zone when COVID hit the world, it's actually the exact opposite of what actually happened or what the naysayers were saying. Not only were we able to manage and contain the impact of a major world event like COVID, we were also able to do that by ensuring that we are keeping our books clean. And that's very, very important. The majority of the world really pump-primed their own economy and borrowed excessively, and they have flooded the local market, which has its own economic implications. On the other hand, we've achieved all of that, food security, vaccination, and the economic growth coming out of COVID, with our balance sheet actually in a much healthier shape than most people would have thought that we would be in. So to my mind, I think, while you mentioned 77 years, the last 10 to 12 years have been the turning point. And the way we have created the digital infrastructure for public good is an example for the rest of the world to follow. And I think a lot of things that has been built on that is, again, creating the backbone of a model of development that many other economies today want to emulate. So I think we are setting many examples. We are charting a new growth. I do know that when you look at it from a 30-year point of view, and you look at how economies have grown over a period of time, the formula was to export yourself to prosperity. And this was essentially export of manufactured goods, whether it is Korea, whether it's China, Japan, all of them went through that path. I think India has gotten to where we are today on the back of services, which is very, very different. And obviously that's got enabled because of the way the digital infrastructure in the world has built up. But we are a very large and dense country, so we can't be running on one engine, which is why the Make in India campaign is. I hope I've sort of put an arc in terms of what I have seen over the last 30 years. And I'm delighted to be at this point in time and excited as to what the country holds for many of us and our next generation.
For people who are not familiar with the India story, what are we missing? Or what are they missing, rather?
Well, let me put it this way. I think as a market practitioner, the majority of people that I interact with are from the investment world, and of course, some of the other, opinion makers, so to speak. I think the thing that they miss about India, or those who are distant observers, if I may call that, is they don't understand the intricacies of this country. This country it doesn't have one image with which people should be understanding this country. It's so diverse and so different. And the pictures of economic progress that you may see in one region versus the lack of progress in another region can be completely contrasting with each other. And you have states where the per capita income is like sub-Saharan Africa. And you have cities like Mumbai, which is, crawling over with millionaires, dollar millionaires. So it is a study in contrast. And the cultures, the languages, most people don't even understand that, 3 neighboring states in the southern part of the country speak languages which are entirely different, whose script is entirely different. And yet, as a nation with so many languages, so many cultures, so many religions, we still function as one country. It's hard for people to fathom because there is no such example in other parts of the world.
Yes. Thank you, Srini. Curtis?
No, first I join you in your optimism about India. But as you know, India is so many different things. But in that wonderful diversity, we find also its incredible strength. I enjoyed so much both of your comments earlier this year at our Milken Institute Global Conference. But also I was struck by the great optimism and some kind of projections too about an election in India early May. Should investors take a step back, or should they think, well, that's just part of doing business in wonderful India? What were your thoughts? I want to say it was just 1 week later since we first gathered back in LA.
No, absolutely. I think the popular opinion, and I would dare say the urban opinion, which is what mine and many others, assumed that it would be a shoe-in for the BJP. And most people thought that, it's going to be, an easy and comfortable majority in the lower house for which the election was held. But as it turned out that just as the earlier question, what do people miss? It's not just outsiders who miss things. It looks like even insiders are missing a few things. And, the election, so the election outcomes were not exactly what the pollsters predicted. And it did bring out the underlying angst in certain sections of the population, be that youth in terms of employment, or be that regional development, and so on. And the best part of it is that this is the ultimate example of a democracy that is actually working. And again, I go back to naysayers who said, "Oh, Modi is an autocrat. India is essentially an autocracy. Democracy doesn't exist in India." Well, there you are. I mean, if that was the case, he would have won 400 seats. It didn't happen. And in many ways, the fact that a section of society which felt that they were not getting what is due to them are able to express themselves and have a voice in the parliament, which puts a check on excessive power, is very healthy. And I think, no government can be perfect in many ways. And I'm pretty sure every government will have its flaws. So it's always good to have certain checks and balances. So on the overall, the outcome has been healthy. It doesn't dramatically change the direction of policy that we may have, but it will alter decision making on certain factors and more equitable distribution of the economic benefits.
Do you think, though, investors might look at that less than positive? Sometimes, here in Asia, some people say, well, investors love our authoritarian governments because it means labor will be working, things will move forward, there's certainty. What is your reaction to that? Is that incorrect thinking? What should we say to investors who thought things are moving forward, business-focused reforms?
Yeah, I think the business-focused reforms will continue. Let's not forget, before 2014, for nearly 30 years, we had a coalition governments of all kinds of alphabet soups combination that you could think of in India, right? But during that period as well, the original reform started in 1991, and after that, we had a series of all kinds of governments. The country continued to progress. Major economic policy decisions continued in the same direction, which means opening up the economy further and so on and so forth. Without getting into the nitty-gritties of, this was changed and that was changed and this affected my business or that affected my business. The bottom line is, despite any combination of people who were in power in the country, none of those governments went and changed a major policy decision of the previous government. So if something was opened up, if there was a policy to sell, for example, government-owned public sector enterprises, it was pursued by practically all the combinations. So I think at some level, I would probably credit to credit the bureaucracy, credit the central bank, which throughout this entire period has acted as an independent central bank and a truly independent central bank, to be able to educate the political class that, look, this is what the right thing to do for the country is. And I suspect that when we opened up the economy in the public markets to foreign institutional investors in 91, 92, and thereafter, for the longest period of time, they had the majority ownership of the floating stock. Any negative decision unfriendly to markets, the barometer of the index would communicate the message the next morning to the government. And I think that, that made things, comfortable for everybody. India was always, as we say, 3 steps forward, 2 steps backward, and still 1 step net forward. Having said that, I think in the last 10 years, between 2014 and 2013, I think the math was 3 steps forward and only 1 step backwards. So we were making net 2 steps forward. And to the best of my knowledge, looking at the way the cabinet has got staffed, and it's pretty much exactly the same set of people, there will be continuity of policy, and that's what is shown in the budget statement in June as well.
Angela, one point you had raised earlier was the Olympics. Yes. First, kudos. I think India this year had 6 medals, I think, but clearly some people wonder, such an amazing, wonderful, huge country, yet only ranked 71st in like the medal count. And India is indeed, I think the 5th largest economy and maybe en route to overtake Germany and Japan by 2030. And yet in that top 5 listing medal list, clearly China, US, Japan, Germany are there. Where is India? What's happening? Because clearly the best is yet to come. But why is that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, culturally speaking, if you throw a bunch of weights to an Indian and a laptop, they would prefer a laptop. Rather
than
you can do both. Right? Hey, and kudos to Los Angeles. In 4 years, cricket is coming to the Olympics.
That's right.
So hopefully India will dazzle there, right? Just like it does in hockey and field hockey. Angela.
Yeah. But I think, it's an interesting question that you asked, because I think when, as a social spending, as an economy which is spending on education and health education, let me put it this way, I don't think there was enough surpluses in the economy in general for making sport a lucrative option for youngsters to undertake. But that is changing. There is surplus amount now available. There is sponsorship available. There is capital available to provide the nutrition, the facilities, the training, the mental makeup. I mean, what? And I was watching some of these sports persons in Olympics. There are so many areas in which the Indian athletes came fourth by a whisker, right? And in many of those cases, it is a combination of physical ability, and very often it is a combination of mental ability.
Right.
For example, I'm a badminton player, so I watch the badminton match where this guy, brilliant player, he was playing for the bronze medal. The first game, he actually won the game, right? In the second game, he was leading 8-1. And when you have that kind of a lead in badminton, you basically just go and close it out. Thereafter, he lost that game and the next game, and he lost the medal.
Wow.
So it's about, it's not about, it's about psychology, mental makeup, strategy. A lot of things have to go into this. So I would say that, things will change as more money comes into the sport, and people feel that they can actually pursue sport as a career.
Indeed, all in time. Absolutely.
Thank you. So Srini, I just want to get back to the U.S. Ambassador Eric Garcetti's plans to host pension fund managers in India soon, so they can learn more about the India story and make it part of their emerging market portfolio. What should we expect? And how is India different from other markets? If you can just expand on that a little bit more. Talk to us also about your plans and interests in the U.S. market.
Well, I think, it's a great step that Ambassador Garcetti is taking to get these pension funds to come and see for themselves what this country is about. As we talked about earlier, not many people understand the complexities unless you actually come and see for yourself. And you meet people and you meet the leaders, whoever he's going to set up interviews or meetings with. And I'm pretty sure he will have a diverse set of leaders and achievers, both in the political sphere as well as in the social and corporate sphere. Many of the very large US pension funds and the pension fund managers, to the best of my knowledge, rely upon consultants and advisors, or, as we market people call as gatekeepers, for advice and opinion. It's one thing to have advice and opinion, another to actually go and experience it yourself. So I'm glad that this leadership team is coming in, and hopefully they will be able to really put a picture to the advice that they're getting, and make it a valuable input in their decision making. I think the other aspect of something like this is that you asked the question with regard to how is India different from the other markets. When you look at from an investment horizon point of view, if you take the public markets in India, for example, it's an extremely diverse market. I mean, even today, when we talk about the US market, for example, the top 5 tech stocks have essentially taken up the entire index, and they are trading at some valuation which is which just makes the market look so big. In India, unlike, let's say, some of the other regional markets where there could be a concentration of a certain set of industries because that particular country is very good at whatever they are doing, in India, you get a very diverse set of companies. So you could get financial services, you get commodity manufacturers, you could get pharmaceutical companies, you could get healthcare services companies, hospitals. It's an extremely diverse set of opportunities, which helps you play the country at large. So there's no concentration of one particular sector, which can change with the fortunes of geopolitics, so to speak. Geopolitics, of course, will impact all markets. So I think that's one big difference between India and a lot of other markets. The second, I would say, is that, again, in the public market side, it's an electronic trading and settlement system. It's one of the most efficient trading and settlement system anywhere in the world. And it's actually, the trading settlement systems are faster than most parts of the world, including the New York Stock Exchange. in terms of the opportunities, the reason India is different is that since I run all kinds of strategies, private credit, real estate, infrastructure, etc., in the rest of the world, particularly in the US and other places, most real estate investors are hurting on their portfolio of office assets. They were hurting on their portfolio of retail assets. In India, it's exact opposite today. We just don't have enough office space for people to go and sit in. Office continues to, last year, there were like 55 million square feet of new office space that was taken up. A majority of it by global captive centers of multinationals setting up office in India. So office continues to grow, continues to be, so it's an exact opposite of what you'd see. Same with retail. Retail continues to grow in India. So there are many cases where the asset classes may perform contrary to what one may be used to in other parts of the world. So in that sense, you need to really understand what's going on in India before you, look at it with a broad brush, so to speak.
Thank you, Srini.
Yeah, one thing, no, sorry, and so one thing I'm always struck by in terms of what people are surprised by is, if they don't know our region, Asia Pacific, it's like China, India, right? And that almost, I would say it's the elephant and the dragon in the room, the comparison of the two. Maybe an investor's like, I'm going to allocate something to Asia, they lump it all together. And if I'm going to reduce allocations in China for whatever reason, does that money go to India? Does that go to Southeast Asia? But one thing people sometimes I find are surprised by is that that question of, is demographics destiny? The latest UN population projections continue to be one of where China continues to shrink. I think last year it's like they had 250,000 less people than the year before. Yet India will continue to grow. And is there a demographic dividend versus a demographic curse from a growing population where India is now the largest nation in the world? And that's despite some of that migration of people who become great Indian Americans, that despite migration from India to the United States, India continues to grow and hopefully thrive. What are your thoughts on that demographic kind of comparison now of China and India as we look at these two great countries?
I think, from a demographics point of view, in India, in various languages, there is a typical, a saying which says that those who really succeed write their own destiny. And at some level, China did that for themselves, honestly speaking. They wanted to grow to what they are today. And honestly, China is far ahead of India. And India will take its own time to sort of get to where China is today. So from that point of view, there's not much of a comparison. But China did that because they wanted to increase the per capita income, control the population explosion, and therefore they had the one-child policy. The consequences of that one-child policy is what we are seeing today with regard to where the population degrowth is coming in. We, on the other hand, also had a population problem, and sometime in the late 70s, there was a slogan that the government had coined, and the population control measure was essentially hum do, hamare do, which means that there are two of you and you'll have 2 children. And that was the ideal family size that was sort of promoted by the government. And I think what we have witnessed, and I can see it around myself as well, economic prosperity leads to lower childbirth because most people don't have the time to bring up more children. And so we are actually currently seeing a sort of a degrowth in the incremental growth of our population. In India, the challenge in certain parts of the country was gender disparity. There was and I mentioned this in that Milken conference as well. So, but the good news is that over the last 10 years, the government has specifically promoted policies for the girl child, and that gender imbalance is actually made very, very significant change and progress in those states. And we are now reaching a good equilibrium between genders. So I would imagine that we are today a beneficiary of the population growth that we have had, and I guess it is happenstance. I don't think it was by design, and we do hope that along with this kind of population as what we call as demographic dividend. The recent elections have also shown that that demographic dividend has to be harnessed properly. People and youth have to find occupations, jobs, etc. And the youngsters in the country, if they're unhappy, it can lead to all kinds of issues, and that we just see that in our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you, Srini. Just to continue, so we're in a polycrisis era where we are dealing with multiple crises in an interdependent world. As we think about our shifts in geopolitics, we've seen what happened in Bangladesh recently. There are questions about, is it India and China, or is it India or China? We have issues that we're dealing with globally that require global cooperation, such as you rightly pointed out, youth unemployment, climate change, for example. So how should we be thinking about trading partners, supply chains, global markets?
Well, I mean, just a comment that as we talk about our region and our world, clearly there's almost like the reemergence of old coalitions, new coalitions. It's like, I think we also have to understand history and the existing economic relationship. Like some people said, India is such a big supporter of democracy. Why aren't they stronger against Russia, given its invasion of Ukraine? But then we look at the reality of the long history between then the Soviet Union and India. We look at military supplies. So there's so many dynamics at work. Way back when, I served in the George W. Bush administration, then continued under Obama. But it was under Bush or Vice President Cheney that began the Quad, this grouping of the US, India, Japan, Australia, which I think Japan saw as this arc of democracy across the region. But then when Prime Minister Rudd got into Australia, and he's now the Australian ambassador to the US, this cycle of history, the Quad kind of like vanished for a bit. And then it reemerged under President Trump with, again, is that elephant or that dragon in the room? It's all about China. Too. So when I think about all these groupings, the reality is that they will continue to evolve. Hopefully they evolve forward. When I sat on the board of the Asian Development Bank, people would always comment that with regards to these multilateral institutions, in groupings like SARC, the South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, it's still South Asia that seems to be the less integrated. It's, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, all the Maldives. Will they yet work together? Well, it's easier for them perhaps to work with others outside of South Asia. And hopefully that changes. I was hopeful. I can't remember when, India hosted so successfully the G20. I can't remember, their slogan was like, one world, one family. I think it stemmed from an Indian saying and philosophy. I think we're still aspiring to that, but perhaps I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are those confidence building measures that we can bring together? I guess there'll be a new leadership in Bangladesh and India, the longstanding India-Pakistan issues. But just as we've seen Korea and Japan try and make up and move forward, I'm always the optimist on all of these podcasts and things. So just from my perspective, there is progress. It might not be as fast as we all like, but there is progress going forward. And I can even note through Republican and Democratic administrations in the US, and I've served in both, I feel the India-US relationship has been the strongest forever, like in a long time. And that's both under a Trump, a Biden, and who knows who comes next.
Yeah, I think, from our perspective, you're absolutely right. There has been a reset in terms of the way India is engaging with its neighborhood as well as with the rest of the world. This government's policy, which starting 2014, has enabled that reset. And insofar as what one has observed, clearly this government believes that their first priority would be to do what is right for the citizens of India. And our biggest concern as a country was twofold, I would say. did not have the luxury of choosing our neighbors. That job was done by the British very long ago in, in 1947. The second is that despite being a very large and dense country, uh, we don't have sufficient energy resources. And we are an energy dependent country, and which also means that you're dependent upon global supply chains. So we just cannot do. We have to do what is right, and that's part of the reason why this whole engagement with Russia, etc. And let's not forget in history, we've had that relationship with Russia because our neighborhood dictatorships was propped up by the United States in that era. And when we did have a war with Pakistan, we had to rely upon the Russians to make sure that no third party came to the particular situation. Having said that, I think that's part of history. Our first priority as a country, from whatever I see, is energy security. At the same time, it is opportune time for us to make sure that that energy security is also achieved through climate change policies. So we are, for example, very serious about what we should be doing on climate change, and in the process help our own selves. So if you look at the targets for green energy that is being generated in India, or the newer full life cycle green energy projects, which is essentially there are multi-billion-dollar projects where we are generating solar energy, using that to pump up water to up the hill, and using that water down, coming down to generate hydel power at night when solar energy doesn't work. So essentially, it is water storage using solar energy and pumping ourselves back, apart from selling it to the grid. So these kind of projects, very significant number of them are already up and running or under execution. And there is a whole bunch of policy related incentives right now to try and be at the cutting edge of new energy, so to speak, and very significant announcements or significant plants being set up for energy storage and energy, whether it is hydrogen, whether it is other forms of technologies. So let's see where we go with that. And I think as long as we as a nation are able to secure ourselves on energy storage, and the good news is that we have secured ourselves with regard to food security, and we are actually a net exporter of food in the region. To my mind, that those priorities will drive our engagement with the rest of the world. And we still have a lot of the country to be built. So we don't have that kind of surplus resources to buy arms and ammunition, even though we are one of the largest spenders in defense. There the government has actually put up a very interesting incentive policy for local development of defense technologies, and the kind of support that they are giving to startups in defense and space is amazing. And we are already seeing the results of that. It was unheard of in 2014 that we would be a net exporter of defense. But last year we had almost $15 billion of defense exports to different countries, including some of the missiles to the Southeast Asian region.
Every year I put out on CNBC or somewhere with a co-author, Jose Colazo, a best and worst year in Asia. And I think recently we gave it to ISRO, the Indian space agency, for its frugal mission to Mars and to the moon. I mean, they're just doing so many amazing things. Remember the old slogan, maybe it still exists, of Incredible India? I always like to think, well, it's also about innovation India, that India hopefully can show our region and the world that there's a path. We all agree on the destination, better lives, more meaningful lives for everyone. But perhaps India can show the world different ways to do things that we can take from India also. I was just in Australia with my chairman, Mike Milken of the Milken Institute. And I remember in one public session, he talked about how, wow, look at some of our great Indian or Indian American CEOs that have transformed so many of our big business, Microsoft is one of the ones where, maybe they didn't do so well under one former CEO, but look at them now. But it's not just tech companies. But again, I think America is continuing to benefit so much from Indians, coming to the U.S. for a short time or just moving there and becoming Indian Americans.
Yeah. Look, I think America has always been looked upon as a land of opportunities for any talented person in whatever field, because of the way the ecosystem is set up there with regard to intellectual property, with regard to risk capital availability, and the overall ease of actually, rewarding meritocracy. I think those, I would say, are the three pillars on the basis of which the US attracts the best of talents from everywhere in the world. And I remember when I was growing up, I'm not an engineer, so, but, I'm the failure in the family, because in most South Indian families, you are either an engineer or a doctor or a useless guy. So, so I'm the useless guy in my family. But my younger brother, and I'm talking, this is 1980 thereabouts. He majored in mathematics, and when he was when he was in high school and he was going to college, he was very clear that he said, "I just want to get out of India," and he used a interesting phraseology at that time. He said, "I want to escape from this place." And he went to the US. He went to Fordham and Chicago Business School and lives in Chicago. So there is a whole generation of Indians who sort of quote unquote escaped to the US, attracted by the opportunity and also driven out by the lack of opportunity in India. And that is the key change that has been brought about, particularly in the last 10 years. Two things happened. One is, of course, the base has grown very significantly. The ability to set up a business, be an entrepreneur, and solve problems.
What is the Asian dream? What is the India dream to you?
I think for us, most Indians actually cherish respect. And if respect has to be achieved through economic progress, I think that is the goal. I don't think it's as much about, I should have so much money, etc. I think a lot of people are happy with a certain degree of comfort in their economic aspect, but the idea that you are respected, both here and if you are a global Indian, when you go out, the fact that you and your country and your profession is respected is, I would say, the ultimate dream. Today, for example, an American passport or an American, this thing is overall acceptable, respected, and so on for their achievements. I think that's probably the dream most, I would say, from an Indian point of view.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to probably leave it to you for what do Indians think. But I've seen all the data that the Milken Institute pulls together, and there is some commonality around the world that people want. I don't just say a better life for them or their children, but above a certain point, people want a more meaningful life. And so I was struck by the good and bad of your saying, "Oh, now it's a good thing to be rich." Right? But when does that go overboard? And let's move it from being rich to be rich with a purpose. And maybe that's how I might want to close. I think about over this next 2 months or so, we will move towards our Milken Institute 11th Asia Summit, where India very much will be in the spotlight. We continue to partner with our terrific ambassador to India, the former LA Mayor, Eric Garcetti. But for us, we talk about, you might make a lot of money, which of course is great, but do something meaningful with your money. Whether it's lift a woman up, lift the cure for cancer up, whatever it is, you will decide. And that should be hopefully all of our dreams too. Better, more prosperous lives for ourselves and our family. But let's lift others up along the way too. And to ensure that, in some ways, in my heart, I believe, ability in many ways is all the same around the world, but the opportunity is not the same all around the world. So what are the steps we take to address that? And that's kind of what we're trying always to do at the Milken Institute. Spotlight people like you, but this notion that this year our theme is one, impactful ideas. Everyone loves ideas, but let's pair that with some purposeful action. And that's what we're all about at the Milken Institute. And very clearly, our hub is in Singapore, wonderful Singapore, but this region is so much more than Singapore, and of course includes India, South Asia, and all the region. So my dream is that we all succeed for that.
Absolutely, very
that's
well said.
Dream, I hope. Go on.
Can I just add one point to that? And I think you mentioned the word impactful idea, right, as your theme. I can tell you that from a making an impact point of view, apart from making money, to my mind, the most impactful idea came from the government of India 5 years ago, when they mandated that a certain percentage of corporate profit after tax has to be spent on what is called corporate social responsibility, right? The idea was, let the corporates decide what impact they want to make with 2% of that post-tax profit above a certain limit, right? And let them put their own resources, people, and professional management to not only support the causes that they believe in, but also measure the outcomes and get that professional input to make the outcome meaningful for the cause. I can tell you that most corporate India thought that this is a backdoor tax. But sitting now 6 years later, it's a fantastic idea. It has made corporates more responsible. It has had a tremendous impact in various areas, including what we talked about earlier, supporting sports or women empowerment, children. It's a fantastic idea. And I would say this is the kind of thing that should be done globally for a global cause, like, for example, climate change or any other humanity-oriented project.
Thank you, Srini. Thank you, Curtis. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on the Heard in the Corridor podcast. Until next time, see you in the corridor.